have an open mind, and just be open to the fact that some of your favorite songs you might not realize that are actually R&B songs. So it's okay to come learn about it. Maybe some of your favorite groups could be a rock group, folk, pop, or hip hop group has sampled some of these songs or lyrics, and you don't even realize what you're listening to. So it's good to learn about the history of it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Go in there. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Okay, we're back. Here we are for a very special episode, I might say. And
So
yes, yes.
special. It's
So
so
special.
special, Amani.
Yes, yes. So we're here, ready for
Amani,
us.
what did you think of the Super Bowl yesterday? That's what I know you were sad because your Commanders were not in it, but what did you
Yes.
think in general? Let's talk about the game, halftime show, commercials. Quick rundown.
Okay, the game, terrible game. However, all credit to Philadelphia because they played phenomenal. So they definitely deserved to win, did well. I wanted Kansas City to win, so I was not happy. Uh, Halftime show I thought was phenomenal, many layers, very educational. People might have to watch it a few times to catch what was going on, but just a great, great halftime show. I don't think it was better than Prince's halftime show in the rain in Miami, but it's still up there. So I really was happy. Commercials were kind of blah. Actually, the one commercial I like was the Snoop and Tom Brady one, that Hate You one. I thought that was a
Yeah,
clever one.
that
There
was
was
good.
also another one I liked. I have to go back and check. There was a couple I liked, but it wasn't as good commercials as I was used to.
The commercials were very underwhelming. I totally agree. I liked the WeatherTech commercial with the grannies driving the cars, and the one granny that flashed. That
Yes,
was I told my husband that that's gonna be me when I'm 90. And he said,
yes,
"Oh, heaven help me. Just
yes,
heaven
yes.
help
Help you,
me."
yes.
Yeah, it was fun. I thought that was fun, but I agree that commercials were underwhelming. I'm happy for Philadelphia. I think, I don't hate Kansas City. I love them. I think they're a very well coached team, but I just Philadelphia just played better. They played a better game, and
Okay.
good for them. I like an underdog.
Yeah, good for them. Fine. I'll accept good for them.
Oh.
So they're good. um, okay, so like I usually ask you, who do we have to look forward to today for our interview?
Who do we have to look forward to today? Well, Amani, I wrote an introduction for our
Yes,
very, very special guests today. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Our next guest elevates the world with his unparalleled music business knowledge. He educates global audiences on how to remain resilient and brilliant with his captivating keynote speeches. He's the music and entertainment professor and director for entertainment and hospitality management at Cal State Fullerton. I need to take a breath. That was a lot, and we're not even
Yeah,
done with the
not
introduction.
done.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah. Keep
coming
going.
back in
Keep
for
going.
oxygen. He's a professional speaker, rocking stages about resilience and creativity. He's a DJ. He is the co host and co creator of this very podcast, Adventures in Business, a two-time author with
Mhm.
his latest book to be released next week. Welcome to the stage, Amani
Yes, yes.
Roberts.
Let's give him a round of applause there. Yes, we'll take it. We'll take it. Yes, yes, yes.
Amani,
All
welcome
right.
to the stage. We're so happy that you're here.
Cool. Where
Thank
shall we
you.
begin?
Well, I love that you're hitting all your own interview points for interviewing yourself. I practiced your voice.
Oh.
Mandy, where should we begin? Where should we begin? Um, I wanted just to let you know, I love this book. So for the audience listening or watching, Amani wrote this book, The Quiet Storm. He is holding it up right now. It has the coolest, raddest orange headphones on the cover of it. If you're not watching, he's holding it
Yes.
up. Look for the book with the orange headphones on it. And I'm not full disclosure, I'm not into R&B music. It's not my jam at all. But you wrote a book and I'm going to read it. That's just what friends do for each other. Also, you wrote a book and then said you're going to interview me about the book. And so I had to do the research.
Yes. Yes, it's perfect. Yes.
But I didn't mind this. So it was interesting. I had 2 weeks to read a very big book, and I was a little intimidated because I'm a slow reader. It went so fast. In fact, every day after dinner, Scoot and I would sit on the couch, and I would open the book, and I would be reading things, and I would shout out a random factoid like, "Scoot, did you know that the Great Pretender was in 44 movies, since, over the last, like, 50 years. Did you know that?" And he'd be like, "No." So, like, we had these factoids, and then there were songs that you listed, and
Mhm.
I was listening to the songs, and he and I were listening together, and then after he and I were talking about, like, the nostalgic, the '80s and the '90s and this, we were sharing just stories. So I had never had a reading experience like this where it was so immersive and I got to share it with my spouse, and it was great entertainment for the week last week. So thank you
My
for that.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
so I
No.
guess with that, like the format of the book, I think is what makes it so immersive. So can you tell us a little bit about the format and then how you developed that format?
Right. So the format was that we'll divide up all the groups by decade, starting in the 50s through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000. We'll rate them in terms of four criteria. Um, Grammy nominations, Grammy wins, Billboard Hot 100 hits, record sales, and then notable performances. So that's how they were rated to even get on the list. Then in the book, we list them just alphabetically, so they're not in any particular order. And then you go through, you get the group, their picture, background information about the group. Then you have their Grammy nominations, Billboard Hot 100 hits in a chart. Then you have like my favorite songs by the group, my favorite samples, so groups that have sampled that group, and then my take, which gives you kind of my thoughts on the group, how I might have found them. And that's the format. You just follow that through 60, I think it's like 62 groups that are in there, 62 groups. There's honorable mention sections in, I think, the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And that's kind of the format. It just repeats. Then the last 15% is based on the research I did for my thesis when I was at Berkeley College of Music, and that's the last kind of 15% of the book.
Okay, and we're gonna get to that because that
Yeah.
that presents a lot of very relevant data that I had no idea was going on in the music business. So we'll get to that. But I want to go back to the samples. And that was something that was a big light bulb for me. So at the
Mhm.
end of each chapter, you list 3 or 4 songs that maybe they came out in 1958, but they're still being sampled in 2022. And one of them was an R&B song that was sampled by Tupac, "I Ain't Mad at Ya,"
Mhm.
and so we played Scoot and I played that, and he loves Tupac. We played that, and then we played the original song,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that was cool because we didn't realize, it's just so interesting. You hear that original song, then you hear the sample, and it takes on a new life of its
Yeah.
own. So, can
Yeah.
you just share a little bit about the the prolific efforts of the R&B music and what impact they have on the sampling of all genres
Yeah.
nowadays?
You will find that many of your favorite pop songs, R&B songs currently of today, hip hop songs definitely of today have sampled old R&B groups, and they've put different pieces of old songs into their new songs to make them more relevant and just to kind of bring back a more familiar feel, more familiar rhythm. You'll even find a lot of samples in like rock music and country music. They might sample things also, which is very interesting. I learned that as I was doing the research. So it's always like it could be a tribute, an ode to a past group. It could be to get a certain feel that's really hard to duplicate nowadays. But that's kind of how the sampling works. And I just had to go through and read about how many times each group had sampled and then pick my favorite songs from those samples.
I love that. Like I don't think a lot of people know that. Like even if you're not into R&B, half of what you're listening to was created R&B. It's just a version of an original R&B song. That was a really interesting part of the book too. All right,
Yeah.
I want to talk about the title, The
Hmm.
Quiet Storm. So I was very interested to learn that this is actually a format for a radio show in the 70s. So can you talk about the title, where it came from and why it's so important?
Yeah. So the Quiet Storm was a radio format that was first created on WHUR 96.3 Howard University Radio in Washington, D.C. And Melvin Lindsay was the DJ. and they created this format to play like love songs and dedications. The majority of the groups they played were R&B groups, and this format spread across the entire world, US first and then the world. And from about the mid to late 70s to the late 90s, it was one of the most popular radio formats, particularly at nighttime. And you would go any city in the country and they would have a quiet storm type of programming, usually at nighttime, 8 or 9 or 10 p.m. to 12, 1 or 2 a.m. And the majority of the groups that they played and the artists that they played were R&B groups on these shows. So I grew up listening to it. Then, there was also, it was 97.1 in DC. They had us another show that the DJ was Glenn Hollis. He blended in a lot of like pop music with it, but it's still a great format. Then you start to get more syndicated programs. Many people would remember like Delilah. Delilah was one. She gets to be a
I
little
was
bit
just
more.
thinking about that as you were talking. I was going down a brain trail of Delilah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a similar format. She's probably a little bit more pop, and she also would bring in a little bit more like religion into her talks, whatever. But still similar format, just offshoots. And in LA, if you grew up in LA, Art LeBeau was really famous for this format. He was really famous. I think he passed away a couple of years ago. But yes, so that's kind of the story about the book. The title. Also, Mobb Deep has a famous hip hop song called "The Quiet Storm," and that's kind of an ode to the samples part of the book. And then I used to, my dream in life is to be the DJ for the Quiet Storm radio program where you might say, "What's up, Amani? This is Mandy. I want to dedicate a song to Scoot. I miss him. Can you play me a song?" That's my dream job. If I could do that every day of the week, I would be like a pig in mud.
Amani, you
So
can do it. You could
I
do
know. I
it.
remember we tried to do. I did a little format of it when I was streaming a lot on Twitch Sunday nights. I did that too. Um, so yeah, I've tried it. We'll see in the future, but that's the whole story, and that's why the fact that it's one of my dream jobs also makes the title more significant for me. Also,
Aw, okay, well, I wanna hang here for a second as we talk about dedicating songs to people, because you open up in the book and you tell a story that I find so cute, others might find it creepy. I thought it was so adorable and so vulnerable that you shared it, because I think we all have done something like this, especially when we were in grade school or high school or whatever. So you tell a really cute story in the book how when you were in junior high and high school that you would call up your crushes and you would
hmm
play love songs for them on the phone.
hmm
So
hmm
tell me about that. Like, how did that go down? Did you give them warning? Were you chit-chatting? Like there's a little idle chit-chat, then you're like, "I got a song for you," or like, did you play it? Did you hang up on them? Like, how did that
oh,
go?
looking back on, I could have executed so much better. But back then, I was so excited to try it out. I'll never forget. I called up one of his crushes and played "Ready or Not" by After Seven. I'll give you the sun, the moon, the stars. I played that song, the whole song. She
Oh,
didn't hang
no.
up. She
She
didn't
didn't
hang
hang up?
up.
Oh
But
my
then when the
god.
song was over, click. So I
Oh my
hung up.
god, that's
I
so
hung up. I
weird.
remember another song by Whistle, "Still My Girl." It's been said that dreams don't come true. I thought I proved it wrong when I met you. First song, the first two lines of
Aw.
the song. Played that for another crush, hung up afterwards, but they knew it was me or whatever. So we get to school the next day or whatever. They're like, "Oh, it was that." It's just, the hopeless or hopeful romantic in me just trying to be different or whatever. Nowadays it probably would work really well, but and not be a creeper either. So that's a true story. Like, I mean, and if you talk to my friends, they know that I've done that. And yeah, that's just continues to that's part of my love for R&B groups because many of the songs I played were by R&B groups.
Well, you know what I think it's so lovely is that you're sharing something you love so much with somebody that you had a crush on. That's the gist of it, right? It's
Yeah.
like, how many things does my husband share with me that I'm like, "Oh god, I have no interest in it," but it's like it matters to him
Yeah.
and he wants to share it with me. Same with me, like the weird things I want to share. It's like it's so kind you want to share something that matters to you, but
Yeah.
I was putting myself in a position of like, if I was 13 years old and a boy called me and just played a song, like what would I do?
Yeah, I was a little ahead of my
And
time. I was probably a little bit ahead of my time, but it is who I am. I have I have no regrets, and I have no problems talking about it because yeah, that's me. I mean, I can list you specific people and times I played the songs
oh,
too. We won't go into that, but yes.
That's so sweet. That is sweet.
It's
Well,
so funny that you picked up on that story too. That's good.
I did. In fact, I think I told you this already, but I'll tell the audience. When I read that out loud, I was like, "Scoot, listen to this move Amani did when he was in high school." And then both of us, we role played it. He's like, "How's that go down?" Like, you call somebody and then like so we I was like, "I'll be the girl and you be Amani." Like we did the whole thing. It
Yeah,
was just
yeah.
funny. It was a fun interaction we had, but I thought it was really sweet. So thank you for being vulnerable. We all
Mhm.
have stories about silly things we did when we reached out to our crushes. And that,
Yeah.
that's just one. You don't even, the things I did were ridiculous and none of them worked. None of them worked on
Yes.
any of
None
my
of them. Yeah.
crushes, but
Yeah. Yeah.
we live to
Me
tell the
neither.
story.
Me neither, but
Yeah,
I did it. Yes.
we did it. Speaking of memories, though, like that was something else that came up as I was reading this book of like a song you would mention would just spark a memory. It would take me down into places that I hadn't thought of in so long. And one of those moments was, I think it was in the 1950s chapter when you talked about the Clovers and Love Potion number 9.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now that was a song that my mom and my little sister and I would listen to. We on our AM radio in our orange, maybe Thunderbird, I don't know. It was a big orange car with like the bench seats and we know every word to that song, and we would sing at the top of our lungs. And after you mentioned that, it just took me down so many other paths of, like, just singing in the car with my mom. My mom just would, like, pound on the steering wheel and just sing, and so the nostalgia was amazing. So I can only imagine what that was like for you as you were writing the book. Like, what memories came up for you, what you were writing that maybe you hadn't thought about for a while or might have been like locked away in the mind bank?
Yeah, I think when you ask this question, like my dad and I used to travel up and down the East Coast to like soccer games, and he was a big Frankie Beverly and Maze fan. So Frankie Beverly and Maze was on the radio a lot. We didn't. I don't think we had a tape deck. We might have got a tape deck later on in life, but Frankie Beverly and Maze, particularly like Join Pain and Before I Let Go. And then a lot of times at cookouts, family cookouts, Gap Band, Outstanding would come on. I'll remember New Edition when I would walk to school and walk home from school. The Any Heartbreak album was really big. So I'd listen to that going and coming. I knew the words, I knew all the order of the songs. When I when I moved to Chicago, I remember there was a SWV. I think it was their second or third album that just brings back memories. When I lived in Miami and would go to South Beach or Coconut Grove, Destiny's Child was really big. So Say My Name comes up. So I remember a lot of times where I was living and what I was doing through like some of the memories of these songs. And, they just keep coming back and back. Like I'll never forget Jodeci's second album. I was in Howard Towers at Howard University, and wherever you play that album, like you would hear it throughout the entire dorm or the building. Howard Towers is where I was living. And so just those are just some memories that come to mind right now.
Ah, see? This just music just bonds people together. It just takes you back to a place. And I love it when there's something that can stimulate your mind to wander in places you hadn't planned on wandering. I think that's a real big gift that this book brings to the
Mm.
reader. It was a gift to me. Okay, you just said New Edition. So I want to go back to New Edition for a minute. I feel like you have a grievance that you want to file about your favorite band, New Edition. Do
Yes.
you want your time on the mic to file your grievance?
I just am so surprised that they never earned a Grammy award. I don't understand it, but it could be something with the politics of the Grammys. I don't know. But they still have time. But yeah, that's one of the groups I was really surprised with that didn't earn a Grammy. The Jackson 5 is also a surprising one, which really kind of gives more context to when Michael Jackson didn't win for Off the Wall either. So that's an interesting one there. There's so many random facts that just surprised me. In Vogue never had a number one Billboard Hot 100 hit. They always got to number two. But that was one that really couldn't believe that they didn't earn a Grammy. That was really one that surprised me.
Well, I was surprised by that too, because when I turned on New Edition, I was like, "Oh, I know all these words too."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
you forget that these are like a fabric of your youth, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So speaking of surprises, something that I was surprised to learn about was diamond status
Mm.
and who's won diamond status, who hasn't. So can you just explain a little bit about that? That was the shocking part for me.
Yeah, diamond status is when a record or a record album sells 10 million copies or more. Now it's a little different because they include streams in that statistic. So that's diamond. And I think For US based female groups, there have only been two in history that have earned diamond status. These are groups. So that's TLC and the Chicks. And that
Mm.
was really surprising. TLC won it and got it for Crazy Sexy Cool. And that didn't really help them because they actually had to file for bankruptcy because they just spent so much money and they just didn't own the music rights or things. But that was diamond status. There's been one R&B group in history, male group, to earn diamond status. That's Boys to Men for their album Two, and so that's what diamond status is. Then you have platinum, which is 1 million, and gold, which is 500,000. But that's kind of what diamond status means.
Okay, and I speaking of Boys to Men, that was another part of the book that I was fascinated with the whole Boys to Men and Belle Biv DeVoe and that whole section of it. I
Yeah.
think the transition from one band or one group to the other, and then the people that spin off on their
Mhm.
own, their own journey is fascinating that you cover in that. Which spin-off of a solo career from a one of the R&B groups did you find most impactful that you had discovered in your research?
I think we gotta stay here. Like New Edition, which spun out. Yeah, Bobby Brown, who went solo. Then you have like Ralph Tresvant went solo. Then you had like Johnny Gill, who was a bit solo before, and that. So New Edition, but then New Edition gave way and kind of birthed Belle Biv DeVoe. And
Mhm.
then Michael Bivins from Belle Biv DeVoe is one of the people who first discovered Boys to Men. So you can see just how the trees and the branches go. So that's probably one of my favorites. Of course, the Supremes birthed Diana Ross. That was kind of a big one there. The Gap Band really birthed Charlie Wilson, who's really popular now. Um, those are some of the most popular ones. Jodeci then birthed another group, Casey and JoJo, which had some phenomenal songs like the mid to late '90s, All My Life. Um, so those are some of the ones that come to mind right away. Yeah, like In Vogue and Tony, two different groups, but they birthed Lucy Pearl. So it's just all these little groups that come from one of the branches flow.
Yeah. Oh, and you talk about let's hang at the Supremes for a minute. Because some of the knowledge you dropped about the Supremes was fascinating. Can you talk about the hand clappers?
Yes, yes. So the Supremes eventually were signed to Motown Records, Barry Gordy, and initially they were only allowed to clap their hands on songs. I think it's over 100 songs that they provided hand clapping sounds for. And then finally they were allowed after a little bit over a year to sing backup on songs. So then they sang backup on a few songs, and finally they were allowed to create and not create because they had their music. They were a band before they joined. They were allowed to release their own music, and their first 8 songs did not do well on the charts at all. They did so poorly that, excuse me, they were known as the no hit Supremes within Motown.
Oh, wow.
And then finally they had one song. It was called "When the Love Lights Start Shining Through His Eyes." In 1963, it hit number 23 on the charts. After that, "Where Did Our Love Go" was their first number one song. 11 of their next 14 singles songs went to number one on the charts, which is
Oh, wow.
unprecedented. It's unprecedented. It's very rare. And so they really showed a lot of resilience and persistence because they were close to being written off, but then they really kind of hit this hot streak and it was just amazing. And they were icons. They are icons.
I love that you talk about the resilience of like sticking with it. Like Motown won't give you the front stage, but they'll let you clap. Motown won't give you the front stage, but they'll let you be backup artists. And I think through this book, one of the common themes is the resilience
Hmm.
and the brilliance, which I know is your main keynote speech that you
Hmm.
give too. But if you relating it to modern day business and the resilience and brilliance that businesses can have so they can avoid being obsolete like a lot of the R&B groups, what are some of those top things that you've seen, using the music business as a model, some of those top things that you see that is translatable in business to stay resilient and stay brilliant in business?
I think there's 7 things that I've through my research I've seen. Um, Number one would be like you have to take creative risks. You have to collaborate with others. You have to be persistent, just like the Supremes were. You have to be
Mhm.
resilient, like another group I'll talk about, the Whispers. You have to embrace failure. reinvent yourself, and stay curious. I think those are the seven important pillar points that you need to do to kind of survive in business nowadays because things are changing so fast. You have to be able to adjust and kind of just adjust and be able to shift things on the fly to stay relevant.
I love that. And you just said something that reminded me of another part of your book.
Mhm.
You talk about Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Ooh, yes.
And when you said you have to be creative, you have to take creative risks. Can you talk a little bit about what Earth, Wind, and Fire did? What creative risk they took that
Mhm.
ended up making their live show better than ever?
Yeah, they wanted to make their live shows very memorable, so they elicited the assistance of a magician. So they had this one magician, I have to look at his name because his name is different, that really helped them initially with their show. And then eventually they started working with this magician's assistant, who's a very famous musician. His name is David Copperfield, and he helped them make their live shows just very different, very memorable, very edgy. And he worked with him for over a decade, and they are so tight and they work so closely that when the Earth, Wind, and Fire got the Kennedy Center honors, David Copperfield was one of the people who introduced them. And so they were just really tight, and they had a magic show during their show that was very different, wasn't very popular. So they took a creative risk because it could have failed and their shows could have been booed off the stage, but it worked. And that's one of my favorite examples of how a R&B group took a creative risk and it worked out.
See, I didn't realize, is that how David Copperfield got his start then? Because he was the magician for Earth, Wind, and Fire, and then he became the superstar after that?
So I think it was early on in his career. He was an assistant to another magician, and so this was one of the avenues that helped him kind of build his name and get to be successful. Yes.
How fascinating. I had no idea.
Yeah.
You talk a little bit about in your list of 7 things, you talked a little bit about adapting to change. And so I wanted to ask you, because you talk a lot about this in the book about crossover musicians.
Mm,
And I know right now we're seeing this in the music genres where Beyonce is crossing over into, country, and Taylor Swift crossed over from country to pop. Even the Chicks crossed over into pop from country.
mhm.
So, what is a crossover musician? And can you explain in the music business what impact this has?
So I think a crossover musician is a musician who kind of got their start in one specific genre. For example, it could be R&B or hip hop, but then they kind of diversify the genres that they have songs in. So it could be they go from R&B to pop. They go from pop to country, country to pop. They could go from R&B to hip hop or hip hop to R&B. A lot of times, particularly back in the day, like the Isley Brothers, they were really a rock group first. They were a rock group first with that song "Shout." I think you make me wanna shout. Put that was like a rock song, and then they kind of transitioned and it crossed over more into R&B. Also, many of the R&B groups, and I'm particularly thinking about like Jodeci and a couple others, really started in the gospel space. So they were in gospel and then they crossed over to R&B. That's really common, particularly back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Because, in gospel music in the church, people have to sing. It's a lot of singing, a cappella, a lot of rhythm. So it fits with the R&B genre. So that's what kind of crossover means. The benefits for an artist is that it opens yourself up to a totally new audience that can become exposed to your music because now you're singing in their genre, and it really widens your reach and helps you grow your fans. The number of fans you have and your exposure, it increases that tremendously.
It's funny that you say that because I feel like the halftime show yesterday was an opportunity for Kendrick Lamar to expand his audience and to cross over if he wanted to. He might not have wanted to. He just probably wanted to do his own thing, right? But I think that's the beauty of some of these big shows like the Super Bowl or the Grammys is like I went to the Country Music Awards several years ago. I'm not a country music fan, but I was introduced to the Osborne brothers and I
Mhm.
loved them. They were more
Yeah.
rock than country, I thought, right? And so I think some of these big events is an opportunity for people to be seen to a wider audience. And so yesterday when we were watching the
Mhm.
Super Bowl, my family, we had a text chain, and my older sister who loves classic rock was like, "Wait, where's Bon Jovi? I don't
Yeah,
understand
yeah,
this music. Where's Bon Jovi?" Because she loves
yeah.
Bon Jovi. I love Bon Jovi too. So, what do you say to the people that aren't into R&B or have never really listened to R&B or it's just not their style, what do you say to those that are always just into classic rock or they're into country and they're like, I'm not gonna read a book about R&B. Like what does this book do for them?
Well, I would think, very similar to how it impacted you. Like you are not an R&B fan, but you read the book and you were surprised by so much of the facts that you learned, how many
Yeah.
songs you recognize that you might not realize are R&B. That's the real thing, is that people might not realize that some of their favorite songs, particularly songs they might hear and love to dance to at a wedding, like Earth, Wind and Fire September, is an R&B song. And so I would say to them, have an open mind and just be open to the fact that some of your favorite songs you might not realize that are actually R&B songs. So it's okay to come learn about it. Maybe some of your favorite groups could be a rock group, folk, pop, or hip hop group has sampled some of these songs or lyrics, and you don't even realize what you're listening to. So it's good to learn about the history of it.
Yeah, that's a good point because I think you had mentioned something about like Jimi Hendrix
Oh yeah.
slept on the Isley Brothers couch. Or am I remembering that right?
So
What was
he
that
he actually
story?
played on some Isley Brothers songs, and he lived with one of them before he got to be really big, and so that was a crazy fact that I didn't even know, and, yeah, that's just another gem you'll find in the book with Jimi Hendrix, who is rock, as you know, is a rock
All
artist,
rock.
all
Yeah.
rock and, phenomenal, legendary, but he got one of his starts with, like, an R&B group, but back in the day, the Isley Brothers were kinda rock and R&B combined, so you just see the evolution and some of your favorite artists you might not even realize were playing on R&B songs or remade R&B songs. You just don't, you never know.
That's such a good story. This book is just it's filled with so many good stories. Like the story about how the song Midnight Train to Georgia came to
Oh,
be. Like it was
yes.
technically a story about Farrah Fawcett taking a midnight plane to Houston.
Yes.
And like the stories of the how the tracks of my tears and
Mhm.
how the miracles wrote that and like how he was looking in the mirror and he's trying to figure out like what if my tears only fell like in tracks. Like there's just story after story after
Mhm.
story that is so compelling, but I'm really curious about what stories didn't make the book. There's always something that didn't
Yeah.
make the book or was like on the cusp. What didn't make the book?
Yeah, I think for the most part, um, I don't really remember what stories didn't make the book because there's so many. It's hard to leave. There could have been some groups that had multiple stories out there. I don't really remember like what stories did. I have to get back to you on that one. I still can't remember like what stories didn't make the book. But yeah, like there's a lot of stories in there. I didn't have to take out many stories. I did have to take out some lyrics because you're not allowed to put lyrics in books, which I didn't
Yeah, is
know.
that like a license? That's a
Yeah,
licensing
the
kind of
licensing
thing?
thing, but
Yeah.
yeah, for stories and I try to stay away from the more salacious stories. However,
Mhm.
there are some stories about how many, many groups really kind of broke up or didn't exist anymore because of either drug use or money disputes. So I did put some of those stories in there. Um, yeah, yeah, so that's kind of what comes to mind, but I can't, I have to get back to you on that. Put
Yeah,
a
get
bookmark
back to
in
me
it.
on that. Yeah, because people ask me that when I wrote my book. They're like, "What didn't make the book?" I had to think about it, and then like it came flooding back to me.
Yeah,
And I remember everything. I didn't even look it up, and I remembered.
yeah.
Anyways, we've come to the there. I'm going to do your voice again. We've come to the point in the show where we invite the guest to ask the host a question. You can ask any question you want. There's nothing off limits. So, Amani, what would you like to ask me?
Okay, so 2 questions for you. The first question would be like, as you were reading the book, what were the 2 things that you learned in the book that surprised you the most that you might not have shared so far?
Hmm. I mean, I think I shared this, but I don't think I went as deep into it. I was just surprised at the number of songs that I knew that came from somewhere that came from somewhere that came from somewhere, you know? Like
Mhm.
I didn't realize that till I actually listened to the music and it was fascinating. Yeah, I think that was the surprise. I also I think I went into this thinking this was more of like an almanac. It was an encyclopedia. It was going to be boring. Like full disclosure, I'm like I'm reading this for my friend, but like I was shocked at how like just intrigued I was. Like I couldn't
Mm.
put it down. And then I was really shocked about how what a fun experience it was for Scoot and I
Yeah.
just to sit on the couch and talk about music. I think just the immersive part of it was very shocking. Surprise, not shocking, but surprising. I
Yeah.
hadn't, and you have and I wasn't able to do this, but you have the QR codes that you can scan and download the playlist, which I that was surprise. It makes sense. It's a book about music through the
Mhm.
decades. Like it makes sense, but I thought that was a really nice touch. I haven't downloaded any of them yet, but I thought that
Yeah.
was a nice surprise.
The QR codes were nice, the little colors in there, the photographs, that was a whole crazy other experience was collecting the photographs.
Yeah, talk about that because those are all Getty
Yeah.
images that you
Mhm.
had to purchase,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah,
so
that
how many images and, like, what's that process?
yeah, that was a very surprising part of the book. That's, it was 132 images, and I had to go through and find them all on Getty Images. Then we had to negotiate with Getty to use them in the book. Then I had to place them in the book in the right spots with the captions. That was a whole probably took me a good month to finish that process, just finding the images. Then there was 18 images that I wanted to use, but I didn't have the right permission that I had to go back and renegotiate with Getty Images to get it. Finally, they gave it to me. But once I started seeing the pictures, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is gonna help the book come to life even more." Because you see some of the pictures, whether it's in color, they were color pictures, black and white. So I had to make a conscious decision that we're gonna print the book in color so that you see the difference. Like there's some groups from the 50s where you see color pictures, which is pretty rare. Most time you see black and white pictures. The Chantels was an example of that one. And so the photos that just kind of really helps the book come to life, and so that was a process with that. Also you see the little touches of color with like the emojis with the fire and the hearts after each chapter, just little touches in there. The Easter egg for each decade, when you see the decade there's an Easter egg there. um
The pictures are spectacular. They're
yeah.
not normal, like, band pictures. They're
Yes.
like it's like the bands in the wild doing super fun,
Yes.
funny things. Yeah, those are you picked really good pictures.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. That's something I'm very proud of that really just helped elevate the book. Um, and then my final question to you, oh, I had it with me. I was going to ask you. So you asked me about what kind of surprised you, and then like what was your favorite part of the book? Like I'm curious about what you kind of said what your favorite part of the book was like, but like how would you, if you were in my shoes, use this book to elevate my thought leadership?
I mean, I think the book is the receipts of your thought leadership, you know? I mean, you already have a really awesome keynote speech that I've seen. Your
Mhm,
resilient and brilliant keynote speech where you use the music industry as the example of how to stay resilient and brilliant in business in any industry, right? But if I were you to level up that speech, I would take more stories and stats from this book and package that together because
mhm,
this this whole book is an example of like we just talked about all these examples of people how they changed and they morphed and they went solo and they did this and they started brands and they did that. I mean, I think your keynote is great as it is, but now you've got the receipts and the stories and the stats from this book. I would just pour even more examples of this into that speech to really help businesses and your audience at these conferences that you speak at understand like, hey, you're 3 months away from being Jodeci or you're 3 months away from being
mhm,
TLC, like, you know, people don't realize, like, sometimes you feel like you're alone in this, and you don't realize, like, this has happened before, this has happened to other people, and you it's not too late to veer off and take a different direction, so I would just I would use more stories and stats from this book and package it, like, I've got this book, The Quiet Storm, I've got this speech, Resilient and Brilliant, and I would package that together because I think it's a great message, and now you've
okay.
got the book behind it.
Yeah. All right. Great
Yeah,
answer.
that's what I do.
Yes.
Okay, I want to focus on the end of the book. So you talk a lot at the end of the book, which I you present some facts that I didn't know that are really interesting, and it really starts with why is Destiny's Child
Mhm.
the beginning of the end of R&B groups. So let's start there and then just give some examples of what made R&B start becoming obsolete. Like what factors were present in the market that started this turn?
Yeah, so Destiny's Child went solo probably late 2004, mid 2005. that was the time period where, first of all, like hip hop was hitting mainstream. The record labels kind of made a choice: are we going to really push hip hop, or are we going to try to push R&B groups? Um, they could have pushed both. That's probably a whole nother story, but they didn't. Then we went right into the music recession, the recession of 2007, 2008, which really hit the music industry hard. At the same time, we shifted our music consumption from like buying albums and buying CDs to more. iTunes was created, and iTunes got to be really big. So then we shifted from an album listening habit to more singles listening. And most R&B groups, they have an album that tells a story. So that happened. After that, the recession really hit the groups hard, because then you had some of the earned media, primary African American publications, Ebony, Essence, Jet, and Vibe, all kind of declined, pretty much went out of business. They went to digital formats, but it wasn't the same, because you had at its peak about 8 million monthly subscribers to less than a million. So that was severe loss for earned media. Not to mention, you had shows like the Arsenio Hall show in living color that went off the air, that was a way for these groups to be publicized for
Yeah.
free, so to speak. So this all happened. Then you have the recession also. 54% of mom and pop record stores went out of business during that recession.
Mm.
45% of big box record stores went out of business. Like, think back to Tower Records, no more. Declining stores like the Best Buys, the Circuit Cities, they all kind of went away. You used to go there and buy CDs and things. That goes away. So that happened. And then back in 1996, it was the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and that was supposed to diversify radio. But you really had three companies: iHeartMedia, Town Square Media, and Cumulus Media, buy up pretty much all the radio stations in the country, and they shifted it to more of a playlist format. So if you're in San Diego, I'm in DC, we're in Chicago, Seattle, Dallas, you're pretty much going to hear the same songs on the radio, because it's all playlist formats, because they're really beholden to the advertisers, and the advertisers aren't very diverse and don't understand R&B groups, R&B music. So as a result, it's very vanilla, same songs, different city. So that really hurt.
So
And then
no more local, like, hey, play this song for me. Play End of the Road by Boys to Men for me. Like
yeah,
there's
no,
none of
because
that local dedications or local
N
requests
no
kind of thing.
local flavor like Boyz II
Yeah.
Men, you mentioned Philadelphia, Destiny's Child, Houston, TLC, Atlanta, Shy from DC, WPC Home Jams, all these different groups that were born out of these different cities and grew locally until they got big nationally, that kinda went away. So that doesn't really happen that didn't really happen, and it just kind of was the imperfect storm. A quiet storm, but the imperfect storm of what happened to R&B groups, and they have yet to recover.
So the small stages were eliminated. It's either you get on the big stage or you're completely invisible,
Yeah,
basically.
that, and then financially, it made sense for labels to just focus on singular acts, the birth and really the emergence of YouTube. So it got to be more singular, and groups kind of, because rock groups kind of gone away, pop groups, there's a few here and there, but not nearly as many as there were before. So the groups as a whole kind of went away. I think that R&B groups just went away first and took a more of a severe drop than other groups in history.
It's fascinating. It's like you don't really think about how these little things add up
Hmm.
and then they make you, completely go away, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned something which I thought was really interesting about EDM, about
Hmm.
how the EDM music genre almost also went away because their live experiences were called raves. And as soon as they changed their live experiences from raves, as soon as they changed the name from raves to festivals,
Yeah.
then they went back on a surge. I think you showed a graph or you talked about like line by line for as much as EDM popularity was going up, R&B group popularity was going down. Like, can you share that data? I
Yeah.
thought that part was really interesting too.
I think with EDM music, especially once they change it from rave to festival, and then you start to get certain songs that hit the Billboard Hot 100. I'm trying to think of the specific song. It's like Crazy Monsters. I have to look up the right
Oh,
so by
Calvin
Skrillex.
Harris, right?
There was a Skrillex song that was probably the first big one that really hit the top 20. They started to continue to ascend. You had R&B singular acts like an Usher, a Neo, a Rihanna that were singing more EDM type songs. They kind of started to take over, because then the radio stations, once again going back to the radio, they thought that EDM music became a little more palatable than R&B groups, because R&B groups were talking about like falling in love and love and maybe a little bit of sex and things like that. Where EDM groups were just talking about partying, so they thought that those songs were a little more palatable for radio than traditional R&B. So they kind of took over that way, and that's just what happened. And EDM music is still really, really big now. It's a big genre, and there just wasn't enough space for all of them on popular radio, so they kind of took over.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
I wanna pause on the book for a minute, and I wanna
Mhm.
go to the Wayback Machine, to the 1990s
Yes.
where Amani, where you were at Howard University,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and, where you weren't calling girls anymore, playing songs. Maybe you were, like, maybe you were
I was
make
making mixtapes.
I
I
was
was
gonna
making
say
mixtapes.
you're making a mixtape. I was just about
Yes.
to
Yes.
say that you're making a
Yes.
mixtape.
Yes.
What advice would you give to your 21-year-old self?
Ooh, ooh, this is my favorite question. I hardly ever get to answer for myself, so thank you for
Mhm.
asking.
Mhm.
Um, I would say a couple things like it's okay to try. You should definitely try to live somewhere overseas, particularly a Spanish speaking country, because that's one of your dreams. Being a DJ that is definitely a legitimate career. I didn't think it was at the time. I would also say to really, really be careful about who you let be close to you. Just be very careful because some people might have the best intentions. And then don't let your fear of being alone cause you to make some poor decisions in life. Yeah. Yeah.
That's powerful, Monty.
Mhm. Yeah.
Good advice. Good advice. I'm looking up at I know we both share the same quote. I'm
Yeah.
looking up at it right now above my computer. Surround yourself with people who want to move their lives forward in a productive and joyous way. And I'm glad that that's a takeaway for you that you're living your life in that way too. That's
Mhm.
really beautiful.
Yeah. It
It's
took me a while to
beautiful.
get here, but I'm here.
You're here.
Yes.
How can we support you and lift you up and support this book and your keynotes and everything you're working on right now?
Just continue to share the book. The website's thequietstormbook.com. So go there, buy it, share it with people. We're making a race for the USA Today's bestseller list. But then, after that, we want to keep the momentum going. So there's always the resilient and brilliant keynote, 7 keys to unlock your creativity. And just share the book with someone who you think is either like a music lover, R&B lover, or like a history buff, because the book's got a tremendous amount of history in it also. And I just love to share. I love this. I'd like to say that this book is like my love letter to R&B music.
Aw, that's nice. Amani, I bought the book for my mom for her birthday the other
Oh,
day.
nice. Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
she's loves all those 1950s and 60s
Yes.
music stories. That's so
Well, tell
great.
tell her to tell me what she thinks. What I would love to know from anyone who reads it, what's one or two surprising facts that you did not know before reading the book, until after reading the book? Like, yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, so if you're listening to this and you buy the book, shoot Amani a message. You can comment on our Adventures in Business Instagram page or LinkedIn page, or you can just send Amani a direct message what your biggest surprise of the book
Yes.
was. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good
Yeah.
question. Well, Amani, thank you for being on our lovely show today. It was fun to turn the tables and have
Yes.
you as a guest. That was
Yes.
great.
Absolutely.
And um, I know we're really, really excited. So the book comes out February 18th
18th. Yeah.
next week.
Next
You
week. Yes.
can pre-order it right now. You can go on Amazon, pre-order it. You can go on Amani's website, thequietstormbook.com and
Exactly.
pre-order it. And let us know what you think. And just thanks for your time and your talents and for pouring so much into this book. We
Yes.
appreciate you.
It's my pleasure. I am very proud, 4.5 years, and I'm just excited to get it out in the world. And
We're
with
almost
that,
there. We're almost there.
who do we have to look forward to next week on the show? Well,
Next,
first, I'll give
oh,
myself an
yes.
applause. We'll give
Oh,
myself
give
an applause,
yourself a
right?
round of applause.
Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes. Round of
Amani.
applause here for Mani. And with
Uh,
that, who do we have to look forward to next week?
Annette Gregg.
Yes.
So we love Annette Gregg. She's the CEO of the Society of Incentive Travel Executives. She's a friend of the show. She's a friend of ours. She's been in the industry a long time, very respected, definite thought leader, and I'm excited to have some time with her next week. So Annette Gregg,
Absolutely.
we'll be back next week, 1 o'clock Pacific Standard, 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.
Awesome. So remember, if you're watching the show or listening to it, please remember to rate, review, subscribe on the platform you're watching or listening on. Also, feel free to share it with a friend. And just thank you very much, Manny, for such thoughtful questions. Just a phenomenal interview. Thank you for reading the book in advance and sharing with me your honest feelings. And so I'm excited for everyone to get it in its format here. And with that, we will see everyone next week.
See you next week. Don't forget, visit us on Instagram, Adventures in Business Live, and visit us on LinkedIn and comments, currencies in the comments. We'll see you there.
Yes.
Thank you for tuning in to Adventures in Business. Don't forget to rate and review our podcast on the platform that you're currently listening it on. And don't forget to share it with your friends and anybody that might be as much of the business nerds as Amani and I are. See you next time for another captivating interview.